The triage bay of Hushline Relay Station screamed. It was not a singular noise, but a layered cacophony of disaster. There was the rhythmic, mechanical shriek of the atmospheric pressure alarms, the wet slap of boots on synthetic flooring, slick with coolant and blood, and the low-frequency thrum of the station's stabilizers, fighting against the gravitational pull of the nebula outside. But cutting through it all, sharper than a scalpel, was a sound that made the hair on Caleb Ward's arms stand up. It was a raspy, hitching whine. It sounded like kittens being strangled by a vacuum seal. Caleb snapped his latex gloves, the elastic cracking against his wrist. He was kneeling beside a transport pilot who had a 3-inch shard of bulkhead embedded in his thigh. "Hold still," Caleb said, his voice level despite the chaos. "If you keep thrashing, I am going to have to stitch this crooked, and your wife will never let me hear the end of it." The pilot gritted his teeth, his face gray with shock. "Just get it out, Ward. It feels like fire." Caleb worked with the efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. He did not look at the door where the strange noises were getting louder. He did not look at the flashing red lumens overhead. His eyes flicked briefly to the corner of the room, to a reinforced polymer crate lined with acoustic foam. Inside lay Penny, his 3-year-old daughter. She was curled into a ball, clutching a battered stuffed rabbit that was missing one ear. She was asleep somehow amidst the apocalypse. Daddy Medic Caleb muttered to himself as he clamped a vein. 2 jobs, 1 spine. The doors to the main bay hissed open, overridden by a command code that turned the lights from emergency red to a blinding, sterile white. The sudden shift in illumination made Caleb squint. The screaming noise intensified, becoming a chorus of dry, choking gasps. Dr. Rowan Pike, the station's xenoneurologist, hurried past Caleb. Her lab coat was stained with 3 different colors of hemolymph, and her normally sharp bob cut was a frizzy disaster. "Move," she barked at a group of orderlies. "Clear the central tables. Minari delegation incoming. And for the love of logic, kill those alarms." Caleb finished the suture and patted the pilot on the shoulder. "Stay down for 20 minutes. If you stand up before then, you will bleed out and I will be too busy to clean it up." He stood up, wiping sweat from his forehead with his forearm. The atmosphere in the room had shifted. The panic of the human refugees was replaced by a heavy, reverent dread. Through the doors marched a phalanx of tall, lithe figures clad in ceremonial armor that looked less like metal and more like hardened ceramic or bone. The Minari. Caleb had seen them before, in spaceports, moving with the fluid, predatory grace of bipedal felines. They were beautiful and terrifying, with wide, flat faces, high-set ears that swiveled independently, and eyes that reflected light, like polished coins. But he had never seen them like this. Leading the group was a female Minari who radiated a terrifying aura of command and exhaustion. Her fur, usually a sleek graphite gray, was matted in patches. Her armor was unpolished. This was Serena Shal, the matriarch warrior of the delegation. In her arms, she carried a container made of transparent crystal, suspended within a gravity field. Behind her, other Minari carried similar pods. The sound was coming from inside the crystals. Dr. Pike met Seren in the center of the room. The human doctor looked tiny beside the alien warrior. "Report," Pike said, skipping pleasantries. Seren's voice was a low growl, vibrating in her chest before forming human words. "The litter is failing, Doctor. It has been 4 standard rotations. No sleep, not a blink." Caleb stepped closer, drawn by a morbid curiosity and a professional instinct he could not suppress. He peered through the transparency of the nearest crystal pod. Inside, there were 3 Minari infants. They were small, perhaps the size of a human forearm, covered in soft, downy white fur. But they were not sleeping. Their limbs jerked in violent spasming convulsions. Their eyes, enormous and solid gold, were pinned wide open. They were staring at nothing, blinking at nothing. The raspy sound was their breathing, rapid, shallow and desperate. "They are burning out," Pike said, her voice dropping. "Their neural pathways are firing continuously. If they do not enter a REM cycle within 6 hours, the damage will be permanent. Brain death will follow shortly after." "We have administered the somnus vapor," Seren said, her claws clicking anxiously against the crystal. "We have tried the resonance chants. We have tried silence. Nothing breaks the wakefulness." Caleb watched the infants. He had seen exhaustion in soldiers, the kind of 1,000-yard stare that came after 3 days of combat. But this was different. This was biological defiance. It looked like their bodies had forgotten how to turn off. "We need to intubate the smallest one," Pike decided, grabbing a datapad. "His oxygen saturation is dropping below 80%. "Warning," Seren hissed, stepping between Pike and the pod. Her hand went to the hilt of a curved blade at her waist. "The Dream Nest laws are absolute. No vocalization from outsiders while the barrier is down." Pike threw her hands up. "We are in a triage center, Seren. Not a temple. If I do not give orders, my team cannot work. If you speak with an alien inflection while their auditory cortex is exposed, you will imprint chaos onto their developing minds." Seren countered, her ears flattening against her skull. "They will grow up hearing your voice in their heads. It is an abomination." Caleb looked back at his corner. Penny was stirring. The change in light and the aggressive tone of the voices were pulling her out of her nap. He felt a spike of anxiety. "Look," Pike said, lowering her voice to a harsh whisper. "We can use hand signals, but we need to stabilize them." Seren hesitated, then nodded once. The barrier drops. Silence. Absolute silence. The Minari guards deactivated the crystal seals. The sound of the kitten's distress became raw and unfiltered. It filled the room, a jagged, pathetic rasping that grated against the nerves. The infants thrashed on the sterile tables, their claws scrabbling against the metal. Caleb moved to the perimeter, ready to assist if a physical trauma occurred, but keeping his distance as per the protocol. He watched Pike work with silent, frantic hand gestures. Her team moved in, inserting IV lines with practiced precision, but every time a needle touched Minari's skin, the infants shrieked, their bodies arching in rigid spasms. It was not working. The sedatives were flowing into their veins enough to knock out a heavy Worlder ox, but the infants' eyes remained wide, terrified, and painfully awake. And then the worst possible thing happened. In the corner, the acoustic foam failed to dampen the rising tension. Penny Ward sat up in her crate. She rubbed her eyes, dropped her stuffed rabbit, and looked around the terrifying alien-filled room. She saw the giant, armored cats. She saw the blood on the floor. She saw the flashing lights. She opened her mouth and let out a wail that pierced the sterile silence like a gunshot. "Daddy." The effect was instantaneous. Every Minari in the room spun around, weapons drawn. Seren moved faster than Caleb could track her blade, clearing its sheath with a ringing hum. "Silence the child." Seren roared, forgetting her own rule in her fury. Caleb didn't think. He didn't calculate the geopolitical ramifications or the biological laws of an alien species. He just saw a 7-foot warrior moving toward his daughter with a sword. He vaulted over the supply table, crashing between the Minari and the crate. He scooped Penny up, shielding her head with his hand, pressing her face into the crook of his neck. She was shaking, sobbing into his scrub top. "Shh. Pen, shh." Caleb whispered, his heart hammering against his ribs. "I've got you. Daddy's here." The Minari were advancing. Pike was waving her arms frantically, trying to stop a massacre. Penny wouldn't stop crying. Her panic was feeding off the tension in the room. Caleb squeezed his eyes shut. He needed to calm her down right now, or they were both going to die. He ignored the aliens. He ignored the station. He went back to the one thing that had worked since the night Avery died, the one thing that bridged the gap between terror and peace. He began to hum. It was a low, rumbling baritone, the vibration traveling from his chest directly into Penny's ear. It was the melody of an old Earth folk song, something Avery used to play on a guitar that had been missing two strings. "The stars are dim, the void is deep," Caleb sang softly, his voice trembling slightly before finding its footing. "The ships are quiet, the angels sleep. Stop him," a Minari guard hissed. "Halt," Seren ordered. Her voice was not angry. It was stunned. Caleb kept singing, rocking Penny gently. "Close your eyes, my little one. The long, dark drift is nearly done." He expected to feel cold steel cut into his back. He expected to be dragged away, but the room had gone breathless. Penny's sobbing hitched, then slowed. Her breathing evened out. Within 30 seconds, she was limp in his arms, asleep. But that was not why the room was silent. Caleb opened his eyes. He turned slowly, keeping Penny shielded. The medical tables were still. The thrashing had stopped. The Minari infants. The litter that had been awake for 4 days. The creatures whose biology was defying every medical intervention were lying perfectly flat. Their ears were drooped low. Their breathing was deep, rhythmic, and silent. Their golden eyes were closed. Caleb blinked. He looked at Dr. Pike. Pike was staring at a monitor, her mouth slightly open. She tapped the screen, thinking it was frozen. "They are in Delta Wave," Pike whispered. "They are sleeping, deep sleep, all of them." Caleb shifted Penny's weight to his other hip. He felt the sudden, crushing weight of 100 eyes on him. Seren Ashel stepped forward. She sheathed her blade, but her movement was stiff as if she were walking through water. She looked at the sleeping infants, then at Caleb, then at the sleeping human child in his arms. Her expression was unreadable, a mix of awe and profound violation. "What magic is this human?" she asked. Caleb cleared his throat. It felt dry as dust. "It's not magic. It's a lullaby. My wife wrote it." "You used a vocal resonance," Seren said, stepping closer. "You projected a sonic pattern into the dream nest. You broke the first law. I was trying to shut my kid up so you wouldn't slice her in half." Caleb snapped the adrenaline, finally turning into anger. Seren looked down at Penny. She reached out, a clawed hand hovering it, inches from Penny's face. Caleb tensed, ready to bite the hand if he had to, but Seren did not touch. She merely sensed the air around the child. Dr. Pike moved between them, holding up a data pad. "Look at the readings, Seren. Look at the overlay." When Caleb sang his theta, waves synchronized with his daughter's. "That is normal for humans. But look at the interference pattern. It created a field, a bioacoustic dampening field." English, Rowan Caleb said. "You acted as a metronome," Pike said, looking at Caleb with wide eyes. "The Minari barely dream anymore. Their sleep centers are atrophied. They need a guide, a rhythm to latch onto. You and Penny became a neuro-anchor. You dragged them down into sleep with you." Caleb looked at the kittens. They looked peaceful. For the first time since they arrived, they looked like babies, not dying things. "I just did what I had to do," Caleb said. Seren straightened up. Her demeanor shifted from warrior to something colder, more bureaucratic, and infinitely more dangerous. "You provided the first sleep," she said formally. "I helped them out," Caleb corrected. "Now, if you don't mind, I have a shift to finish and a daughter to put back in her crate." "You cannot leave," Seren said. Caleb stopped. "Excuse me. You have invoked the sleep debt," Seren announced. Her voice carried the weight of iron bars slamming shut. "By Minari law, the one who grants the first sleep to a litter becomes responsible for their waking. You have created a dependency. If you leave, they will wake, and the next time they will not be able to sleep without the anchor." "That is ridiculous," Caleb said, looking to Pike for support. "Tell her that's ridiculous," Pike grimaced. "Biologically, she might be right, Caleb. The neural pathways just fused around that specific frequency. Your voice, your daughter's presence, it's like a key snapping off in a lock." "I am a medic," Caleb said, his voice rising. "I fix bones. I patch holes. I am not a glorified white noise machine for alien royalty." Seren signaled her guards. Two of them moved to block the exit. "You are no longer just a medic," Caleb Ward Seren said. "You are a debtor. The debt must be paid. It can only be settled by the dream bond." "And if I refuse?" Caleb asked. Seren gestured to the table. "Then you condemn 12 infants to death by exhaustion. Is that the human way to save a life, only to let it wither?" Caleb looked at the kittens. He looked at Penny, sleeping soundly against his shoulder, unaware that her father was being drafted into an alien servitude. He thought of the oath he took, do no harm. Walking away now would be the ultimate harm. He let out a long, defeated breath. "I need a chair," he said. "And I need someone to watch my back while I sit here." Seren nodded. The guards stepped back, forming a protective circle around him instead of a blockade. Caleb sat on a stool near the infants. The proximity seemed to deepen their sleep. One of the kits, a small one with markings like stripes of dark lightning, shifted. It reached out a paw, blindly seeking something in the dark of its dream. Penny, still asleep, let her arm dangle. Her small hand brushed against the soft fur of the Minari kit. The contact sparked a faint blue static discharge that no one else saw. The Minari kitten twitched. Its vocal cords not designed for human speech, not designed for anything but growls and purrs, vibrated. It was a sound that came from deep within the REM cycle, bypassing the conscious brain entirely. "Dad," the word was broken, synthesized and wrong. It sounded like two stones grinding together to mimic a human voice. Caleb froze. He looked at Seren. Seren's ears were swiveled forward, trembling. She had heard it too. "What did it say?" Caleb whispered. Seren did not answer. She looked at Caleb with a new expression. It was not anger. It was not gratitude. It was fear. Just then, the comms unit on the wall buzzed. It was Envoy Stephen Miles. His voice was tinny and breathless, the sound of a man running down a corridor. Ward, are you there?" "Yeah, Stephen, I'm here." "Listen to me very carefully," Miles said. "Security feeds are leaking. The video of what happened in the triage bay is out. Half the station is calling it a miracle. The Purity Clade is calling it a contamination event." Caleb rubbed his eyes with his free hand. "Which means what Stephen it means. Captain Caldwell is on her way with a squad to extract you for debriefing," Miles said. "And the Minari High Council just transmitted a diplomatic override. They are designating you as a dream anchor. Ward, you are about to be the rope in a tug-of-war between a military extraction team and an alien religious sect. Do not move. Do not let anyone take the girl." Caleb looked up. Seren was watching the door, her hand resting on her blade again. She knew. "We are not going anywhere," Caleb said into the comms. He looked down at the kitten that had spoken. It was sleeping peacefully now, clutching Penny's finger with a tiny velvet paw. Daddy Medic Caleb whispered to himself, the irony tasting like ash in his mouth. 2 jobs, 1 spine, and now a dozen new kids who won't let me sleep. He tightened his grip on his daughter. "We are just getting started." The transition from the utilitarian, steel and coolant aesthetic of the human sector to the Minari Dream Enclave was not merely a change in geography. It felt like a submersion. Caleb Ward walked with the stiff, hyper-aware gait of a man who knew he was being herded, not escorted. To his left and right, the Minari Honor Guard moved with a silence that was unnerving for creatures clad in ceramic plate armor. They did not march. They flowed. The corridor itself seemed to be breathing. The walls were not made of metal panels, but of a seamless opalescent material that resembled the interior of a giant oyster shell. Bioluminescent veins pulsed deeply within the nacre, casting a soft, aqueous light that shifted from pale lavender to deep indigo. It was beautiful, Caleb admitted to himself, but it was the beauty of a deep ocean trench pressure, laden and indifferent to human life. In his arms, Penny was awake now, though she remained uncharacteristically quiet. She clutched his scrub top with one hand, and her one-eared rabbit with the other, her wide eyes, tracking the shifting lights in the walls. "It feels like inside a tummy," Penny whispered. Caleb adjusted her weight on his hip. "Do not lick the walls, Pen." "I was not going to," she said indignantly, though Caleb noticed she had been leaning dangerously close to a pulsating vein of blue light. Ahead of them, the corridor opened into a vast, domed chamber that defied the cramped architecture of a space station. The ceiling was a holographic projection of a nebula swirling with slow, hypnotic grace. In the center of the room, the floating crystal cribs containing the Minari infants had been arranged in a perfect circle. This was the sanctum of first rest. Seren Ashel stood by the central dais. She had removed her helmet, revealing a face that was severe angular and covered in short velvet-like fur, the color of storm clouds. Her golden eyes tracked Caleb's approach with the intensity of a targeting laser. Dr. Rowan Pike was already there, standing by a console that looked like a cross between a medical scanner and a church altar. She looked out of place in her blood-spotted lab coat against the pristine elegance of the alien architecture. "Welcome to the belly of the beast, Caleb Dr. Pike," said her voice, echoing slightly in the vast space. "Or the brain of the beast. I am still trying to figure out the metaphor." Caleb stopped 10 feet from the circle of infants. He could hear their breathing soft, rhythmic, and synchronized. It was the only sound in the room that made sense to him. "Is this necessary?" Caleb asked, his voice sounding too loud. "I have patients back in the triage bay. Actual patients with shrapnel in them, not just tired kittens." Seren stepped forward. Her movements were sharp, contrasting with the fluid environment. "You do not understand what you have done, human," she said. "Then explain it," Caleb replied, meeting her gaze. "Because from where I am standing, I sang a song, and your kids went to sleep. In my medical opinion, that is a good thing." A figure emerged from the shadows behind the dais. He was older than Seren, his fur silvering at the muzzle, wearing robes of woven optical fiber that shimmered with data streams. This was Sage Oren Vale. He moved with a fragility that suggested his mind was far stronger than his body. "It is not merely sleep," Caleb Ward Sage Vale said. His voice was like dry paper rubbing together. Vale gestured to the holographic display above the infants. It showed a complex weave of neural activity. The lines were jagged and red for the waking Minari, but for the infants, they were blue and undulating. "For 3 generations, our ability to enter the dream state has decayed," Vale explained. "We sleep, yes, but we do not dream. Our bodies rest, but our neural pathways do not regenerate. We wake up brittle. We wake up angry. It is a slow extinction of the soul." He pointed a long, thin finger at the infants. These ones were born with a defect amplified. Their minds refused to shut down. They were burning themselves out. The neurological friction would have liquefied their frontal lobes within another 10 hours. Dr. Pike stepped in, crossing her arms. She looked at Caleb with a grim expression. "I have looked at the data, Caleb. It is legitimate. Their neurotransmitters are not reabsorbing. It is like an engine running with no oil." "So, how did I fix it?" Caleb asked. "You did not fix it," Pike said. "You bridged it." She tapped the console, bringing up a side-by-side comparison of Caleb's brainwaves and the infants. "The Minari have lost the internal trigger for REM sleep. Call it a biological button. It is gone. But when you sang, and when Penny was distressed, your combined theta waves created a frequency that mimicked their lost trigger." Pike looked at Caleb, a small, dry smile playing on her lips. "To put it in terms you can explain to the brass. The cats lost their sleep button. You and Penny are the universal remote control." Caleb felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He looked at the infants, then at Seren. "So what happens when they wake up?" he asked. Seren's expression did not change, but her ears twitched a micro-expression of anxiety. "They will seek the signal again," she said. "If it is not there, the panic will be worse. The withdrawal will be immediate. Caleb shifted Penny to his other arm. You are telling me I am a drug. I am telling you that you are a life support system, Seren corrected. And one does not unplug life support because it is inconvenient. The air in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Caleb felt the trap closing around him. It was not a cage of bars. It was a cage of moral obligation. Before he could respond, the silence of the room was shattered by the harsh digital chirp of his comms unit. Caleb, this is Captain Caldwell. The voice of the station's security commander was tight-clipped and devoid of patience. Go ahead, Captain Caleb said, keeping his eyes on Seren. We are tracking biometric distortions in the Enclave, Caldwell said. And I am reading that you have been moved to the Sanctum. You need to return to the human sector immediately. I am a little tied up, Captain Caleb said. This is not a request word. Intelligence suggests the Minari are attempting a biological imprint. If you stay in that field much longer, we cannot guarantee your neural integrity. We are treating this as a hostile containment. I have a squad at the perimeter. Caleb saw Seren's hand drift toward the hilt of her blade. The guards around the room tensed, their ceramic armor shifting with a sound like grinding teeth. Stand down, Captain, Caleb said sharply. I am not being held. I am consulting. You are being naive, Caldwell snapped. They do not want a consultant. They want a battery. Get out of there or we are coming in. Caleb cut the connection. He looked at Seren. Your people and my people are about 5 minutes away from starting a war in a hallway, he said. Seren looked at the sleeping infants. Her mask of command slipped just for a fraction of a second. Caleb saw the exhaustion in the slump of her shoulders. He saw the way her gaze lingered on the smallest kit, the one with the lightning stripe markings. I do not care about your captain, Seren said quietly. I do not care about the politics of this station. I care that my line does not end in silence. She looked at Caleb and, for the first time, he saw her not as an alien warrior, but as a parent who had been standing over a hospital bed for too long. You have a child human, she said, nodding toward Penny. You know the terror of the silent room. You know what it is to listen for a breath that might not come. Caleb felt the hit in his chest. It was a precision strike. He looked down at Penny. She was watching the interaction with wide, intelligent eyes. She did not look scared anymore. She looked curious. He thought of the lullaby. The stars are dim, the void is deep. It was the song Avery had hummed in the transport shuttle the night the blockade runners hit their convoy. He remembered the smell of burning ozone. He remembered the way the lights flickered and died. He remembered holding Avery's hand as the pressure dropped, singing that song to keep her calm while the life support failed. He had not saved her. The medics had arrived 2 minutes too late. If he walked away now, if he let Caldwell drag him back to the safety of the human sector, these 12 lives would flicker out just like Avery's had. He couldn't do it. But he also couldn't be a prisoner. I am not staying as a hostage, Seren, Caleb said. Seren stiffened, her walls going back up. The debt, forget the debt, Caleb interrupted. I do not care about your ancient laws. I care about consent. I will stay. I will help them transition. But I do it on my terms. Seren narrowed her eyes. And those terms are I come and go as I please, Caleb said. I keep my comms open. Penny stays with me, but she is not a subject. She is a child. And if your guards so much as look at her sideways, the deal is off. Sage Vale stepped forward, his optical robes shimmering. The human speaks with a strange aggression, but his aura is stable, Vale observed. The dream bond does not require submission, matriarch. It requires resonance. Perhaps cooperation is a stronger anchor than servitude. Seren looked at the sage, then back to Caleb. She seemed to be weighing the cost of pride against the cost of survival. Very well, she said, but the bond must be formalized. You cannot simply sing. We need to measure the connection. We need to see if it can sustain them through a full cycle. Dr. Pike cleared her throat. I can set up a monitoring interface. Non-invasive. We can track the neural load on Caleb and Penny. If it gets too heavy, we pull the plug. Seren nodded slowly. Agreed. As Pike began to set up her equipment, Caleb walked over to the nearest crystal pod. The small kitten inside was twitching its whiskers. Penny wiggled in his arms. Down, Daddy. Caleb hesitated, then set her down. Stay close. Penny walked up to the crystal. She placed her small hands against the surface. The reaction was immediate. The kitten inside rolled over, pressing its back against the crystal, where Penny's hand was. They are cold, Penny said. Caleb frowned. The temperature in the pod is regulated, Pen. They are warm. Not outside, Penny said, not looking at him. Inside. Their dreams are cold. They are scared of the dark water. Caleb exchanged a look with Pike. That was not a phrase a 3-year-old usually came up with. Who is talking to you, Penny? Caleb asked softly. Penny pointed at the kitten. He is. But he does not use words. He uses pictures. She tilted her head. He says the big man in the cloak is watching. Caleb spun around. Penny pointed toward the far end of the chamber, where a viewing gallery was separated from the sanctum by a wall of polarized glass. The man in the cloak, Penny said. He wants the key. Caleb followed her finger. Through the distortion of the glass high up on the balcony, he saw a silhouette. It was a figure wrapped in heavy ceremonial robes that swallowed the light. The figure was not looking at Seren. It was not looking at the guards. It was looking directly at Penny. Caleb felt a surge of protective instinct so violent it made his vision blur. Who is that? Caleb demanded, pointing at the balcony. Seren looked up. Her expression darkened. That is Prelate Car Dorn, she said, her voice laced with a sudden, sharp distaste. The leader of the Purity Clade. Why is he watching us? He watches everything, Seren said. He believes that the dream decay is a divine judgment. He believes that relying on an outsider, on a human, is a pollution of our soul. Caleb looked back at the glass, but the figure was gone. He walked over to the wall of the corridor, near where Penny had been standing earlier. He noticed something he had missed before. There, scrawled on the iridescent pearl surface, in a faint, phosphorescent powder, was a symbol. It was a circle with a slash through it, jagged and angry. What is this? Caleb asked. Seren refused to look at it. Sage Vale, however, walked over and sighed. It is the mark of the Null Veil, said. The Purity Clade leaves them. It means silence is holy. They believe that if we cannot dream on our own, we should not dream at all. They would rather see these infants die pure than survive as hybrids. Caleb looked at the sleeping kittens. He thought of the hatred required to let a baby die for a principle. He looked at Penny, who was now humming the lullaby to the kitten through the glass. He realized then that this was not just a medical crisis. He had walked into a civil war. Dr. Pike finished setting up the sensors. We are ready, Caleb. Caleb walked back to the center of the room. He sat down on the chair Pike had provided. He pulled Penny onto his lap. Okay, he said. Let's calibrate this remote control. As Pike attached the sensors to his temples, Caleb's comms unit buzzed again. It was Envoy Stefan Miles this time. Caleb Miles, said, his voice calm but strained. I have managed to talk Captain Caldwell down from a breach, for now. We are designating you as a medical liaison. It gives you diplomatic immunity and allows you to stay in the Enclave without it being considered a defection. Thanks, Stefan, Caleb said. But Caleb Miles continued. Be careful. I am looking at the intelligence reports on Car Dorn. The man is a fanatic. If he thinks those children are becoming dependent on a human, he might decide that they are better off dead. I know, Caleb said, looking at the spot where the cloaked figure had stood. I think he already decided that. Caleb closed his eyes. He focused on the rhythm of his own breathing. He focused on the weight of Penny in his arms. He focused on the memory of the lullaby. The stars are dim. He felt a sudden strange tug in the back of his mind. It was not painful. but it was heavy. It felt like a hook sinking into deep water. He opened his mind and the connection snapped into place. Suddenly, he wasn't just in the room. He was everywhere. He could feel the 12 heartbeats of the infants, as if they were his own. He could feel their terror, a cold black static that screamed of isolation. And then he pushed the lullaby into that static. He felt the infants latch onto it. It was a desperate, hungry grasping. They pulled at his mind using his stability to anchor themselves against the dark. It was exhausting. It drained him instantly, like running a sprint. He gasped, his eyes flying open. Seren was kneeling in front of him, her face inches from his. Her hand was on his knee. "Breathe," she commanded. "Breathe." "Do not fight the current. Ride it," Caleb grit his teeth. "It feels heavy." "That is the weight of a life," Seren said fiercely. "You chose to carry it. Do not drop it now." Caleb nodded. He steadied his breathing. He let the sensation wash over him. Slowly, the drain stabilized. It became a hum, a background noise. Pike was watching the monitors. "Stabilization achieved," she said, her voice full of disbelief. "Neural sync is at 94%. It is working. They are regenerating." Caleb slumped back in the chair, sweat beading on his forehead. He looked at Seren. She was still kneeling, looking up at him, with an expression that was no longer haughty. It was complex. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Caleb whispered. "We just put a target on our backs." He looked over Seren's shoulder, back toward the entrance of the chamber. In the shadows of the pearl corridor past the guards, Caleb saw something move. It was not Cardorn. It was a younger Minari, wearing the armband of a technician. But as the figure turned away, Caleb saw the hand brush against the wall, leaving another smear of phosphorescent powder. Another symbol. Caleb tightened his hold on Penny. "Seren," he said quietly. "Yes, I think you need to double the guard," he said. "And check your staff. I think the purity clade is already inside the room." Seren stood up, her hand going back to her weapon. Her eyes scanned her own people with a new paranoid intensity. "Welcome to the family, Caleb Ward," she murmured. Caleb closed his eyes again, letting the dream tide pull him under, keeping the lighthouse flame of his mind burning for 12 alien children who had no one else. "Keep them awake," the whisper had said in his head earlier. But as he drifted into the trance, he realized the whisper was wrong. The fight wasn't to keep them awake. The fight was to make sure they ever woke up again. From the balcony high above, Prelate Carr Dorn watched the scene below. He adjusted his heavy robes. He did not see a miracle. He saw a contamination. He saw a lock that had been picked by a thief. And he knew what had to be done with thieves. He turned and walked away into the darkness, his footsteps silent on the pearl floor. The time for observation was over. The time for purification had begun. The council chamber of the Minari Dream Enclave was designed to make a human feel insignificant. The ceiling vaulted upward into a darkness so absolute, it felt like staring into the void of deep space, punctuated only by the slow rhythmic pulsing of bioluminescent moss that clung to the high arches like constellations. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting the gathered delegates, like ghosts standing on a black lake. Caleb Ward sat in the center of the room on a chair that was aggressively uncomfortable. It was constructed of a smooth, cold silicate material designed for a species with a longer spine and an extra joint in their knees. He shifted his weight, trying to find a position that did not make his lower back scream, but it was impossible. He felt like a specimen in a jar. To his left stood the human delegation, a block of stiff gray and blue uniforms led by Captain Iris Caldwell. She stood with her arms crossed, her posture radiating a kinetic energy that suggested she was 2 seconds away from ordering a tactical breach. Beside her was Envoy Stephen Miles, who looked like he was sweating through his diplomatic dress jacket. To his right were the Minari elders. They were draped in robes of shifting silk that rippled with optical data streams. Among them, standing slightly apart, was Prelate Cardorn. The leader of the Purity Clade did not speak. He merely watched Caleb with eyes that looked like chips of frozen amber. And in front of Caleb stood Seren Ashel. She had shed her heavy combat armor for a ceremonial tunic of dark weave, but she still looked like a weapon. She stood between Caleb and the elders, a shield of flesh and will. Dr. Rowan Pike stood next to Caleb, holding her datapad like a shield of her own. She leaned down and whispered, "Stop fidgeting, Caleb. You look like a guilty schoolboy." "This chair was made for a praying mantis," Caleb whispered back. "And I am pretty sure that guy in the hood wants to eat my liver." "Focus," Pike murmured. "Here comes the pitch." One of the elders, a Minari with fur, the color of dried bone, stepped forward. This was High Speaker Vorin. "We have reviewed the incident in the triage bay," Vorin announced. His voice was amplified by the acoustics of the room booming without the need for a microphone. "The human medic, Caleb Ward, has violated the sanctity of the dream nest. He has introduced a foreign sonic influence to the first sleep." Captain Caldwell stepped forward, her boots clicking sharply on the obsidian. "He saved your children," Caldwell said, her voice cutting through the reverberations. "Let us not get lost in mysticism. Your infants were dying." My medic intervened. "Now, if you are quite done with the theatrics, I am taking him and his daughter back to the human sector. We have safety protocols to maintain." Seren turned to Caldwell. Her movement was slow, deliberate. "You speak of safety," Captain Saren said, "but you do not understand the biology of what happened." "I understand that you are holding a Terran citizen against his will," Caldwell snapped. "I am not holding him," Seren replied coolly. "The situation is holding him." Caldwell sneered. "That is a semantic trap. I am not leaving here without Ward. If I have to drag him out, I will." Seren took a step closer to the human captain. The height difference was significant, but Caldwell did not flinch. "You call it protection," Seren said, her voice dropping to a dangerous low register. "I call it robbing hope. If you take him now, you kill 12 infants before they see their first sunrise. Is that the mandate of your United Earth Fleet? To facilitate the extinction of a generation?" Caldwell hesitated. She was a soldier, not a monster. She looked at Caleb. "Ward report. Are you being coerced?" Caleb looked up. He looked at the faces of the elders, indifferent and calculating. He looked at Cardorn, hateful and silent. He looked at Seren, whose eyes held a desperate, terrified plea buried under layers of steel discipline. Then he looked at Penny, who was sitting on the floor by his feet, drawing on the obsidian surface with a piece of chalk she had smuggled in. She was drawing a cat with 3 eyes. "I am not being coerced," Captain Caleb said, his voice weary. "But she is right. If I leave, the kids die. I can feel it." "You can feel it?" Caldwell asked, skeptical. Dr. Pike stepped in. "It is a literal statement," Captain Pike said. She activated a holographic projector in the center of the room. A large, complex 3D model of a brain appeared. "We have run the scans 3 times, Pike continued. "This is the neural topography of the Minari infants. See these dark zones in the parietal lobe? That is where the sleep trigger mechanism should be. It is atrophied, gone." She swiped the air, and a blue waveform overlaid the red brain map. "This is Caleb's REM cycle. And this," Pike added a smaller, lighter blue wave, "is Penny's. The 2 blue waves interlocked with the red gaps in the Minari brain map perfectly. It looked like a puzzle piece snapping into place." "It is not a drug," Pike said. "It is a prosthetic. Caleb's mind provides the biorhythm that the Minari have lost. It is a synaptic handshake. Without it, the infants' brains spin out of control until they suffer massive seizures." Envoy Miles cleared his throat. "So what you are saying, Doctor, is that Mr. Ward is biologically essential?" "I am saying that for those 12 babies, he is the difference between a cradle and a coffin," Pike said bluntly. High Speaker Vorin struck his staff against the floor. The sound rang out like a bell. The science is irrelevant, Vorin declared. The law of the sleep debt is clear. The human has created a dependency. He cannot simply be a visitor. If he is to remain as the anchor, he must be bound to the house of Ashel. Bound, Caleb stood up, ignoring the protest of his back muscles. Define bound. The high speaker looked at him with disdain. A dream bond. It is a permanent neurological link. It ensures that your mind and the mind of the matriarch are synchronized. It allows the transfer of the sleep rhythm to be stable, constant, and controlled. Without it, your influence is chaotic. You could accidentally drive them into a coma or, worse, wake them into madness. And if I refuse? Caleb asked. Then you must leave, Vorin said, and the infants will be allowed to pass into the void pure and untainted by foreign chaos. A murmur of agreement went through the circle of elders. Kar Dorn nodded a slight, satisfied smile, touching his lips. Caleb looked at Seren. She was vibrating with suppressed rage. She looked ready to draw her blade on her own counsel. This is insane, Caleb said. You are giving me a choice between a forced marriage of the mind or being an accessory to mass infanticide. It is not a marriage, Seren said, turning to him. Her voice was tight. It is an alliance, a tactical necessity. It sounds like slavery with extra steps, Caleb shot back. Captain Caldwell stepped between them. I will not authorize this. We do not let our people get hardwired into alien mainframes. Ward, we are leaving. Now, she grabbed Caleb's arm. At the same moment, two of the Minari guards stepped forward, blocking the path. The room erupted into shouting. Envoy Miles was waving his hands, trying to shout about treaties. Dr. Pike was yelling about medical malpractice. Penny stopped drawing and covered her ears. Enough. The shout did not come from the elders. It came from Seren. It was a roar that shook the dust from the high ceiling. She ripped the ceremonial sash from her tunic and threw it on the floor. I am the matriarch of the Asha line, she shouted. I fought in the ash wastes. I held the perimeter at the siege of Orain. I have bled enough for this council to fill a lake. I will not let you kill my children with your bureaucracy, she turned to Caleb. She stripped away the formalities, the titles, the alien arrogance. She walked up to him until she was inside his personal space, ignoring Caldwell, ignoring the guards. Caleb looked into her eyes. He expected to see the cold calculation of a leader. Instead, he saw a mirror. He saw the same look he had seen in his own eyes in the bathroom mirror for 3 years. The look of a parent who was terrified they were failing. The look of someone holding up the sky with trembling arms. I do not want a servant, human Seren said, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper that only he could hear. I do not care about the bond or the laws. I need help. She gestured helplessly to the empty air. I am drowning, she said. They are fading and I cannot reach them. I do not need a conceal. I need a partner. I need someone who dares to stay when the easiest thing to do is run away. Caleb looked at her. He thought of the shuttle. He thought of the silence after Avery died. He thought of how easy it would have been to just give up, to let Penny go into the system, to stop fighting. But he hadn't. He had stayed. He had learned to braid hair. He had learned to cook. He had learned to sing lullabies when he wanted to scream. He looked down at Penny. She was looking up at him, waiting. He looked at the holographic brain map, at the jagged red lines of pain that he alone could soothe. He gently pulled his arm from Captain Caldwell's grip. Captain Caleb said softly, Stand down, Ward, Caldwell warned. You do not know what you are agreeing to. I know exactly what I am doing, Caleb said. He looked at Seren. I am doing my job. He turned to the high speaker. I have conditions, Caleb announced. His voice was not loud, but it was hard as steel. Vorin blinked. Conditions. You are in no position to. I am the battery, remember. Caleb interrupted. If you want the power, you take the terms. He held up one finger. 1. Total equality. I am not a pet. I am not a subject. I am a parent. I have equal say in the welfare of the litter. He held up a second finger. 2. Unrestricted access for Dr. Pike and the human medical team. No more secrets. If we do this, we do it with science, not just superstition. He held up a third finger. 3. Penny and I can leave the Enclave whenever we want. We sleep in the human sector if we choose. You do not own us. And 4, Caleb said, looking directly at Cardorn. If anyone, and I mean anyone, threatens my daughter or those kittens again, the deal is off, and I will take this whole station apart bolt by bolt to stop them. The High Speaker looked at Seren. Do you accept these terms? Matriarch Seren did not hesitate. I accept. Then let the right of the bond proceed, Vorin said, sounding disappointed. Dr. Pike moved forward. Caleb, are you sure this isn't a blood test? This is deep dive neurology. I am sure, Caleb said. Hook me up, Rowan. The ritual did not take place on an altar. It took place in 2 simple chairs, brought into the center of the circle. A Minari technician brought out the device. It was an oniric weaver. It looked like a halo made of spun glass and liquid light. It hummed with a sound that was felt in the teeth, rather than heard in the ears, Seren said. Caleb sat opposite her. Their knees were almost touching. Relax your mind, Seren instructed. Do not build walls. The weaver will try to find a common frequency. If you fight it, it will burn. I have a pretty thick skull, Caleb muttered. Penny walked over and stood by Caleb's knee. Is it going to hurt, Daddy? She asked. Only for a second, sweetie, Caleb lied. Like a mosquito bite. Seren placed her hands on the armrests of her chair. Her claws extended involuntarily, digging into the material. She was terrified. Caleb saw it. He reached out and, breaking every protocol in the book, placed his hand over hers. Hey, he said. It's just a nap. We are good at naps. Seren looked at his hand, warm, soft, fragile, covering her armored gauntlet. She took a deep breath. Begin, she ordered. The technician lowered the halo. It split into 2 rings, one settling over Caleb's brow, the other over Seren's. The world went white. It was not a visual whiteness. It was a sensory overload. Caleb gasped as the floor fell away. He was no longer in the council chamber. He was in a corridor. It smelled of ozone and antiseptic. The lights were flickering. He was running. His boots were heavy. He could hear the screaming of the hull, plating as the pressure dropped. Avery. He felt the panic. It was a cold, jagged shard in his gut. He pushed open the door. He saw her. She was pale. She was smiling. She was dying. Take care of her, Caleb. Don't let her be sad. The grief hit him like a physical blow. It was a tidal wave of guilt. I wasn't fast enough. I wasn't good enough. Then the scene shifted. He was in a tent. The wind was howling outside, carrying the scent of sulfur and burning metal. He was holding a blade that felt too heavy for his hand. He looked down. His hands were covered in gray fur. They were trembling. They are coming, a voice whispered. The swarm is coming. He looked behind him. A crib, empty. I cannot save them. I am strong, but I cannot fight the plague. He felt a crushing weight on his shoulders. The weight of expectations. The weight of 1,000 years of lineage. You must be still, Seren. You must not weep. Tears are for the weak. Caleb realized he was not in his own memory. He was in hers. He felt her exhaustion. It was deep, bone-grinding. It was the exhaustion of a woman who had been wearing armor for so long. She had forgotten what her own skin felt like. She was terrified. Not of war. She was terrified of the silence in the nursery. And she felt him. Seren stood in the flickering corridor of the hospital ship. She saw Caleb. But she did not see the medic. She saw the man. She saw the nights he spent awake holding a feverish Penny, singing the same song for 4 hours until his throat bled. She saw the loneliness that he hid behind his sarcasm. She saw the fear, that he wasn't doing a good job, that He was just making it up as he went along. He was not a hero. He was just a man who refused to put the burden down. "You are tired?" Seren's voice echoed in the mindspace. "So are you," Caleb's voice replied. The two memories, the hospital corridor and the sulfur tent, began to merge. The walls dissolved. They were standing together on a plain of white sand, under a sky full of two moons. "I cannot do this alone," Seren admitted. The steel fell away from her. She was just a Minari female, stripped of rank. "You don't have to," Caleb said. He reached out. In the mind space, their hands met. There was a flash of gold, a sensation of a knot being tied tight and unbreakable. A new channel opened up, a bridge between his chaotic, adaptable human rhythm and her structured, crystalline Minari mind. The circuit closed. Caleb opened his eyes. He was back in the chair. He gasped, sucking in air, as if he had been underwater for 10 minutes. His head was pounding with a rhythm that wasn't his own heartbeat. It was a double beat. Thump, 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 thump. He looked at Seren. She was staring at him. Her pupils were blown wide. She looked shaken, stripped bare. She knew him. She knew the smell of his grief. She knew the texture of his love for Penny. And he knew her. He knew the softness she hid behind the blade. The council chamber was silent. The halo deactivated and lifted away. Captain Caldwell was leaning forward, her hand on her holster, looking concerned. "Ward report." Caleb blinked, trying to clear the white spots from his vision. He rubbed his temples. "I am okay," he croaked. His voice sounded different, deeper, resonant. He looked at Seren. "Are you okay?" he asked. Seren slowly nodded. She touched her own temple. "I feel quiet. The noise in my head. It is gone." She looked at Caleb with a mixture of awe and confusion. "You are incredibly stubborn, Caleb Ward," she said. "Takes one to know one," Caleb replied, a tired grin spreading across his face. The high speaker checked a monitor. "The bond is stable. The resonance is perfect. It is unprecedented." Dr. Pike was scanning Caleb furiously. "His vitals are elevated but stable. But Caleb, your neural processing speed just jumped 30%. You are overclocking." "I feel fine," Caleb lied. He felt like he had just drunk 10 pots of coffee. Penny, who had been watching the whole thing with the intense scrutiny of a child, tugged on Caleb's pant leg. "Daddy," she asked. "Yeah, Pen." She looked from Caleb to Seren, then back to Caleb. "If you and the big cat lady are mind married now," she said, her voice cutting through the tension with lethal cuteness, "does that mean I have to ask her for permission to stay up late? And who is going to read me my story tonight? Because if you are both busy being psychic, I am going to eat cookies for dinner." The tension in the room snapped. "Envoy." Miles snorted, trying to suppress a laugh. Even Captain Caldwell cracked a small smile. Seren looked down at Penny. The severe matriarch softened. "We can take turns, little one," Seren said gravely. "And cookies are not a valid nutritional substitute for dinner," Caleb laughed. It was a relief to laugh, Caleb told Penny. "She is already sounding like a parent. You are in trouble now, kid. 2 against 1. The council began to disperse, the elders murmuring among themselves, seemingly satisfied that the letter of the law had been followed, even if the spirit had been thoroughly twisted. Captain Caldwell signaled her team. "We are pulling back to the perimeter ward, but I am leaving a detail at the entrance. You shout if you need us." "Understood," Captain Caleb said. As the room cleared, Caleb stood up. He felt the connection to Seren buzzing in the back of his skull. It wasn't intrusive. It felt like a low-frequency radio hum, a sense of presence. He knew exactly where she was, how she was feeling. He turned to look at the infants. They were sleeping deeply, their chest rising and falling in perfect sync with the rhythm Caleb and Seren were now broadcasting. But just as the lights in the chamber began to dim for the night cycle, Caleb froze. Through the new connection, through the open door of his mind that the bond had created, he heard something. It wasn't Seren. It wasn't Penny. And it wasn't the kittens. It was a voice, dry and ancient, whispering from the dark corners of the neural network he had just joined. Keep them awake. Caleb spun around, scanning the empty balcony where Car Dorn had been standing. It was empty. What is it? Seren asked, feeling his spike of alarm through the bond. Caleb shook his head. Nothing. Just an echo. But he knew it wasn't an echo. It was a command, and it chilled him to the bone. He picked up Penny. Let's go read that story, he said. I think we all need to stay close tonight. The months that followed the rite of the dream bond did not pass in hours or days, but in heartbeats. For Caleb, wartime became a fluid concept measured not by the station's chronometer, but by the dual rhythm thrumming in his skull, his own steady human pulse, and the faster crystalline flutter of Seren Eshal's life force. The Dream Enclave, once a place of alien intimidation with its pearl walls and hushed whispers, had transformed into something resembling a home. A very chaotic, very dangerous, and very loud home. The litter, the 12 Minari infants, who had once been dying on a triage table, were no longer helpless. They had hit a growth spurt that defied all human biology. Now, they were the size of toddlers, but with the agility of squirrels and the climbing instincts of geckos. They did not walk, they flowed. They poured over furniture, scaled the opalescent walls, and treated gravity as a mere suggestion rather than a law. Caleb stood in the center of what used to be a meditation chamber, holding a bowl of nutrient paste. He looked like a man under siege. Bala, get off the ceiling, Caleb said, his voice weary but affectionate. If you fall, I am not stitching you up. I am going to let Dr. Pike give you the shot, the big one. The Minari kit, clinging to the bioluminescent fixture, hissed playfully, dropped 3 meters, landed silently on Caleb's shoulder, and stole a spoon of paste before vanishing behind a silk tapestry. Penny Ward sat on the floor, surrounded by 3 other kits who were watching her stack building blocks. She was the undisputed queen of this chaotic kingdom, Dad Penny said without looking up. Cale says he does not like the green paste. He wants the red stuff. Caleb wiped a smear of food from his cheek. Tell Cale the red stuff is for grown-ups and contains trace amounts of heavy metals. Eat the green stuff or he stays short forever. Penny relayed the message in a series of chirps and trills, a pigeon language she and the litter had invented. Kayla Kit, with stormy gray fur, chattered back and grudgingly accepted a spoonful from Caleb. Seren entered the room. She moved differently now. The lethal grace was still there, but it was heavier, grounded by the new life growing inside her. Her armor was gone, replaced by loose robes that could not hide the swelling of her abdomen. She leaned against the door frame, watching Caleb feed the swarm. Through the dream bond, Caleb felt a wash of warmth hit him. It tasted like cinnamon and felt like a sunbeam on a cold day. It was her amusement. You look like a statue overrun by moss rats, she observed. Caleb looked at her, feigning offense. I am a highly trained medical professional. I am currently monitoring their caloric intake. You have paste in your hair, Seren noted, walking over and gently wiping it away with her thumb. They are fast, Seren. Yesterday, I found one sleeping in the ventilation shaft. I had to bribe him down with a laser pointer. Seren laughed, a low rumbling sound that vibrated against his chest. We need to name them properly, Caleb. We cannot keep calling them the fast one, the biter, and Sparky. I like Sparky, Caleb defended. It fits. He chewed through a power conduit last week. It sounds like a malfunction, Seren said, shaking her head. Minari names must carry weight. They must sing of their lineage. Like what, Caleb asked. Valcor, destroyer of curtains. Seren smiled, but her eyes were tired. The pregnancy was taking a toll on her that she refused to admit aloud, but she couldn't hide it from the bond. Caleb felt her back pain. He felt the sudden spikes of nausea. And beneath it all, he felt a current of deep, abiding fear. Their child, was something new, a hybrid. How is the little anomaly today? Caleb asked softly, placing his hand on her stomach. Restless, Seren whispered. It dreams, Caleb, even now. It does not sleep like the others. It is constantly searching. A sudden kick against his palm made Caleb jump. Strong, he noted. Stubborn, she corrected. Like its father. The moment was intimate, a bubble of peace in the center of the storm, but it was popped by the arrival of Sage Orenvale. The old Minari looked grave as he glided into the room. Matriarch, Caleb Ward. Caleb straightened up the playful father mode, vanishing instantly. What is it, Sage? We have the latest neural scans from the fetus, Sagevale said. He did not look happy. Dr. Pike followed him in, looking equally grim. She was holding a data pad and chewing on the end of a stylus, a nervous habit Caleb hadn't seen in years. Let's go to the study, Pike said. You might want to sit down for this. The study was soundproofed, but Caleb could still feel the hum of the station's reactor floors below. It is the neural architecture. Dr. Pike began projecting a hologram of the fetus's developing brain. It is not fusing the way we expected. In a pure Minari Sage veil, explained the dream cortex forms a solid barrier. It separates the waking mind from the collective unconscious. In a human, that barrier is porous. You daydream, you imagine. But in this child, Pike pointed to a glowing white cluster in the center of the hologram. There is no barrier at all. The child is an open channel. Caleb looked at the image. What does that mean in plain English, Rowan? It means, Pike said, her voice quiet, that this baby is going to be a natural-born amplifier. It won't just receive dream signals like the litter. It will broadcast them. Seren's hand went to her stomach. Is it dangerous to the child? To the child, perhaps not, Sagevale said. But to us, to the Enclave. This child could potentially rewrite the neural pathways of anyone nearby. It is a living dream core. Caleb felt Seren's fear spike through the bond, cold and sharp like ice water. He squeezed her hand, sending back a pulse of reassurance he didn't fully feel. So we teach the kid control, Caleb said firmly. We build buffers. We handle it. It is not just biology, Caleb, Pike warned. It is politics. The door chime rang and envoy Stefan Miles entered. He looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days. His diplomatic suit was rumpled, and he was carrying a physical briefcase, something he only did when he didn't trust the digital networks. I apologize for the interruption, Miles said, placing the briefcase on the table. But we have a problem. A big one. Miles opened the case and spread out a series of printed photographs. They were grainy, taken from long-range surveillance drones. The purity clade, Miles said. They are moving. Caleb picked up one of the photos. It showed a gathering in the lower maintenance decks of the station, a place where the environmental scrubbers made the air thick and foggy. Hundreds of Minari were gathered wearing robes marked with the slashed circle symbol. They are preaching that the dream bond is a pollution, Miles explained. They say that Caleb has enslaved the matriarch's mind. But that is the old news. The new propaganda is about the unborn child. What are they saying? Seren asked, her voice hard. They are calling it the abomination of the void, Miles said, refusing to make eye contact. They say it will bring the endless wakefulness. They claim that the only way to save the Minari soul is to purge the source. Caleb felt a heat rising in his chest that had nothing to do with fever. It was a cold, focused rage. They are threatening a baby, Caleb said flatly. They are threatening a concept, Miles corrected. To Cardorn, your child isn't a person. It is a virus. Caleb looked at the photos again. Something in the corner of one image caught his eye. It was a blurry shot of a purity-clad lieutenant handing out data chips. On the wall behind them, scrawled in grease, was a secondary symbol. Not the slashed circle. It was a stylized eye, weeping a single drop of blood. Caleb froze. The air left his lungs. He knew that symbol. Caleb Seren's voice was urgent. She felt the sudden void in his mind. "What is it?" Caleb didn't answer. He grabbed the photo and held it up to the light. "Miles." "Where did you get this?" Caleb demanded. "It is from a Sector 4 rally yesterday." Why, Caleb dropped the photo and turned to the secure terminal on the wall. He punched in his old medical authorization codes. Codes he hadn't used since before he came to Hushline. He accessed his personal archive. The file marked Avery. Autopsy, incident report. He scrolled past the medical data, past the grim recounting of injuries, to the forensic photos of the shuttle wreckage. There. Burned onto the hull of the medical transport, barely visible through the scorch marks, was the same symbol. The weeping eye. "It wasn't pirates," Caleb whispered. The room went silent. "What?" Pike asked. "My wife, Caleb," said his voice trembling. "Avery. The official report said it was raiders. Random violence. They hit the transport, took the supplies, and vented the atmosphere." He pointed at the screen, then at the photo Miles had brought. "But raiders don't paint religious icons on the ships they destroy." He turned to Seren, his eyes burning. "They didn't just kill her for medicine, Seren. They targeted her. She was working on early cross-species neural theory. She was asking the same questions we are asking now." Seren stood up. "You think the Purity Clade killed her? I think Cardorn has been planning this for a lot longer than we thought," Caleb said. "He isn't just a fanatic. He is a serial killer with a congregation." The realization hit him like a physical blow. The grief he had carried for 3 years, the dull ache of loss, suddenly crystallized into something sharp. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't bad luck. It was murder. And now the same people were coming for his second chance. Caleb looked down at his hands. These were hands that stitched wounds. Hands that held feverish foreheads. Hands that had sworn an oath. First, do no harm. But as he looked at Seren's belly and thought of Penny playing in the other room, the oath felt flimsy. "If I find them," Caleb said, his voice barely audible, "I am not going to arrest them." Caleb Pike started warningly. "I mean it, Rowan. They killed Avery. They left Penny without a mother. And now they want to kill this baby." The bond between him and Seren flared. He expected her to pull back, to be repulsed by the violence in his heart. She was a warrior, yes, but she was Minari. They valued control. Instead, he felt a matching vibration, a deep, feral growl of agreement. "We will protect the pack," Seren's thought voice echoed in his head. "By any means." That night, the station was quiet, but Caleb could not sleep. He lay in bed next to Seren, staring at the ceiling. The bond was a low hum, a comfort, but his own mind was a storm of memories. Avery's laugh, the smell of smoke, the weeping eye symbol. Around 3 o'clock in the morning, the hum changed. It wasn't a sound. It was a pressure. Caleb sat up. Seren was already awake, her eyes wide and glowing in the dark. "Did you feel that?" she whispered. The air in the room felt heavy, static charged. From the nursery down the hall, there was no sound, no chattering, no thumping of feet. Complete silence. Caleb was out of bed in a second, grabbing the stun baton he had started keeping under the mattress. Seren was right behind him, moving silently, despite her size. They burst into the nursery. The lights were off, but the room was illuminated by the moonlight, filtering through the viewport. The litter, all 12 of them, were standing perfectly still. They were not sleeping. They were standing on the floor, on the shelves on the tops of the wardrobes. Every single pair of golden eyes was fixed on the viewport. They were staring out into the void of space. Their eyes were not blinking. "They looked like mirrors," Bala Caleb called out softly. The kitten didn't twitch. Then the sound came. It wasn't auditory. It bypassed the ears and vibrated directly against the temporal lobe. It was the whisper Caleb had heard in the council chamber, but amplified 1,000 times. "Keep them awake." Penny, who had been sleeping in a nest of pillows on the floor, sat up. Her eyes were squeezed shut, her hands over her ears. "Make it stop, Daddy," she cried. "The bad man is whispering." Caleb rushed to her, scooping her up. Seren walked into the center of the room. She stood among the frozen kittens. She closed her eyes and let out a burst of mental energy, a command through the dream bond. "Wake up!" The psychic shout hit the room like a shockwave. The kittens collapsed. They fell from the shelves, tumbling onto the soft mats, gasping and mewling in confusion. The mirror sheen left their eyes, replaced by normal, frightened pupils. Caleb looked at Seren. She was swaying, holding her head. "What was that?" Caleb asked, his heart hammering. "That wasn't a nightmare." Seren looked at him, and for the first time, she looked truly terrified. "I have heard it before," she admitted. "In the deep dream. Before you came. Before the bond." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought it was madness," Seren said, her voice shaking. "We are taught that the void is silent. To hear a voice from the outside, it is considered heresy. If I told the council, they would have deemed me corrupted. They would have exiled me." "It's not heresy," Seren Caleb said, looking at the terrified kittens. "It's a transmission. Someone is broadcasting that signal." He looked at Penny, who was sobbing into his shirt. "Someone is trying to hijack them," Caleb realized. "They aren't just trying to kill the kids. They are trying to use them." The next morning, the War Council was convened in Caleb's living quarters. It was an unofficial gathering, just the people they could trust. Captain Iris Caldwell stood by the window, looking out at the station's traffic. She was wearing her field armor, not her dress uniform. "I ran a trace on the signal spike you described," Caldwell said. "It didn't come from outside the station. It came from the core. From the dream," Core Sage Vale asked, aghast. "That is the holiest sanctuary of our people. It is also a massive bioorganic transmitter," Dr. Pike pointed out. "If someone tweaked the frequency, they could turn every Minari on this station into a sleeper agent." Caleb was pacing the room. Car Dorn. "He controls the core maintenance crews." Caldwell turned around. "I don't care about his theology. I care that he just assaulted a United Earth citizen." Penny's nose was bleeding this morning from the intracranial pressure. "That is a hostile act." She looked at Caleb. "I am done playing nice with the diplomat's ward. I am authorizing a protective detail. 24/7. Heavy weapons." "Thank you," Captain Caleb said. "I don't like dream politics," Caldwell grunted, adjusting her sidearm. "But I like kids being alive, and I really hate fanatics who hurt little girls. You focus on the science. I will make sure nobody gets in that door without an invitation." Dr. Pike cleared her throat. "Speaking of science, I have a stopgap." She opened a large crate she had dragged in. Inside were 12 small silver collars. "What are these?" Seren asked. "Faraday cages for the brain," Pike said with a grim smile. "Neural dampeners. They create a localized interference field. It won't stop the bond with Caleb, but it will block any external override signals. It's like putting noise-canceling headphones on their psychic abilities." "Will it hurt them?" Caleb asked. "It might give them a headache," Pike admitted, "but it beats them being turned into zombie drones." She tossed one collar to Caleb. "And I made a bigger one for the baby for when it arrives." Caleb looked at the collar. It felt heavy. "What about us?" Caleb asked. The bond, Pike shrugged. "You two are on your own. Your brains are too interconnected now. If I dampen you, I might accidentally lobotomize you. Just try not to listen to the voices." She grinned, trying to break the tension. "And if Cardorn shows up, I will throw my diplomatic immunity paperwork at him. It is very heavy. It might cause a concussion." Nobody laughed, but the tension eased slightly. 2 weeks later, the fragility of their safety shattered. It happened fast. One moment, Seren was sitting in the garden pod explaining the history of the stars to Penny. The next, she doubled over a guttural sound of pain ripping from her throat. Caleb was there in seconds. "Seren, it is time," she gasped. Her water hadn't broken, something else had. The air around her was shimmering, the reality distortion of the child's uncontrolled power manifesting before birth. "Not yet," Caleb said, panic rising. "It's too early. We have 3 weeks. Tell that to him," Saren gritted out, clutching her stomach. Caleb tapped his comms. "Pike, medical emergency. We are moving to the surgical suite." Now the run to the medical wing was a blur. Captain Caldwell's team formed a phalanx. Around the stretcher, their rifles raised. The hallways were suspiciously empty. They burst into the main surgical theater. The lights were already on. Dr. Pike was there scrubbing in. But as Caleb helped transfer Saren to the table, he noticed something. The team. There were 2 nurses he didn't recognize. They were Minari, wearing standard medical scrubs. But they moved with a stiffness, a lack of urgency, that set Caleb's nerves on fire. And then he saw it. One of the nurses turned to check a monitor. As the sleeve of his scrub rode up, Caleb saw a glimpse of a tattoo on his forearm. It wasn't the weeping eye. It was the slashed circle. Caleb's hand went to the scalpel on the tray. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. "Get away from her," Caleb roared. He shoved the nurse back. The Minari stumbled, his eyes widening. Caleb Pike shouted, "What are you doing? He is purity clad!" Caleb yelled, pointing the scalpel. "Look at his arm." The nurse didn't argue. He didn't try to explain. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, spherical device. "For the silence," the nurse shouted. He threw the device onto the floor. Flashbang Caldwell shouted from the doorway. The room exploded in blinding white light and a deafening sonic pulse. Caleb was thrown back against the wall. His ears rang. His vision swam. Through the haze, he saw chaos. Caldwell's team was engaging laser fire scorched the air. The traitorous nurses were moving toward the table, toward Saren. Saren was screaming, not in fear, but in the agony of a labor that was ripping her apart from the inside. Caleb struggled to his feet. He couldn't hear anything but the high-pitched whine of the explosion, but he could feel the bond. It was screaming, pain, fury, protective instinct. And beneath it all, the whisper returned, no longer a whisper, but a triumphant shout in his mind. "Open the door!" Caleb gripped the scalpel. He wiped the blood from his eyes. "Not today," he snarled. He charged back into the light. The blast from the stun grenade did not ring in Caleb Ward's ears like a bell. It felt like someone had driven a spike through his skull. He was on the floor of the surgical suite, blinking away the white spots that danced across his vision. The air smelled of ozone, burnt plastic, and the metallic tang of Minari blood. Caleb, Dr. Rowan Pike's voice cut through the tinnitus. "Get up, we are losing the perimeter." Caleb scrambled to his knees. The traitorous nurse was unconscious, pinned to the wall by a containment foam grenade that Captain Caldwell had deployed. But the doors to the suite were buckled inward. Sparks showered from the control panel. Behind him on the surgical table, Saren Ashel let out a sound that was half growl, half scream. The contractions were hitting her like tidal waves, ripping through the usual Minari biological barriers. Caleb stumbled to her side, his hands shaking until he forced them to be still. He checked the monitor. Her vitals were erratic. The baby, the anomaly, was pushing against the birth canal with a psionic force that was distorting the sensors. "Saren, stay with me," Caleb said, gripping her hand. "They are coming," Saren gasped, her eyes squeezed shut. "Not just for me, for the anchor." Caleb tapped his earpiece. "Penny, Penny, are you there?" There was a burst of static, then a small, trembling voice. "Daddy, the bad men are banging on the door, but Captain Iris says I have to keep reading." She was in the secure safe room, 3 decks down. "You keep reading, Pen," Caleb said, his voice fierce. "You read the loudest story you know. Do not stop. The kittens need to hear you." "I am reading The Brave Little Engine," Penny said. "But the kittens are crying." Caleb looked at the biomonitor. The neural link, the dream bond, was fluctuating wildly. The panic from the litter was feeding back into Saren, making her pain worse. "I need to stabilize the signal," Caleb yelled to Pike. Pike was loading a syringe with adrenal stimulant. "We can't. The jamming signal is coming from the core. Cardorn has hijacked the main frequency." "Then we hijack it back," Caleb snapped. He didn't grab a gun. He grabbed the main comms override on the wall. He punched in the emergency medical broadcast code, a frequency reserved for station-wide quarantine alerts. He didn't speak. He began to hum. It was the lullaby. The stars are dim, the void is deep, but he didn't just hum it. He pushed it through the dream bond. He visualized the melody not as a song, but as a wall, a barrier of white noise and comfort. He wove the memory of Avery's voice into the frequency, creating a shield around Penny and the litter. Outside the door, the purity-clad zealots were cutting through the metal. But inside the headspace of the Minari, the chaotic screaming stopped. Dr. Pike looked at the readings. "The interference, it is dropping. You are jamming them with a nursery rhyme. If we get out of this alive," Caleb gritted out, wiping sweat from his eyes, "I am requesting overtime pay." Pike racked the slide of a pulse pistol she had pulled from a dead guard. "If we survive, Caleb, I demand a raise payable in uninterrupted sleep." The doors exploded inward. Captain Caldwell was there instantly, her team forming a wall of suppression fire. But through the smoke walked a figure that ignored the lasers. Prelate Cardorn wore robes that seemed to absorb the light. He held a staff topped with a piece of raw, bleeding dream crystal. He did not look like a priest anymore. He looked like a virus in human shape. "Stop," Carr commanded. The word wasn't spoken. It was projected. Every human in the room stumbled, clutching their heads. It was a psychic hammer blow. Caldwell dropped to one knee, her nose bleeding. Carr stepped over the debris. He looked at Seren, then at Caleb. "You fight destiny with a song," Carr said, his voice dripping with pity. "But you do not understand the lyrics." He raised his staff. The crystal pulsed. "Bring them," Carr said. The floor beneath them shuddered. The gravity plating groaned and reversed. Caleb felt himself lifted into the air, not by magic, but by the station's own internal tractor systems which Carr had seized. The surgical table with Seren on it floated up. Caleb Pike and the remaining guards were suspended, helpless. "To the core," Carr said. "The ceremony must be completed at the heart." The dream core of the Minari Enclave was a cavernous space, usually forbidden to non-Minari. In the center stood the core itself, a massive bioluminescent pillar of organic crystal that stretched from the floor to the vaulted ceiling. It pulsed with a heartbeat of its own, the repository of 1,000,000 years of Minari dreams. But now it was bleeding. Veins of red corruption, the purity clade's influence, were spreading through the light. Caleb was dropped onto the obsidian floor. He scrambled to Seren's side. She was fading. The strain of the forced transport and the labor was too much. "Caleb," she whispered, "the child it burns." Cardorn stood before the core. Above him, on a large holographic display, the face of Penny Ward appeared. She was still in the safe room, reading her book, unaware that her image was being projected above the altar of a madman. "Behold the anchor," Carr announced to his followers who lined the upper balconies. "The human child who holds the key." He turned to Caleb. "You thought you were saving them," Medic Carr said. "You thought you were curing a disease." Caleb stood up. He felt the weight of the scalpel still in his pocket. He felt the hum of the bond in his mind. "I know what you did," Caleb said. His voice was amplified by the acoustics of the core. He tapped his wrist computer, projecting a hologram of his own. It was the image of the weeping eye symbol burned onto the hull of Avery's medical transport. "You didn't just target the kitten's car. You killed my wife." A murmur went through the crowd of Purity Clade followers. They were zealots, but they were Minari. They had honor. Killing a healer was a grave sin. Carr did not flinch. She was an obstacle. She sought to mix the bloodlines. She sought to wake the sleeper. "You are the one waking things up," Caleb shouted. You are tearing this station apart, Carr smiled. It was a terrible, thin expression. No, Caleb. I am finishing what she started. Carr pointed his staff at the core. The Minari did not lose the ability to dream by accident, Carr declaimed. We were made to forget. We were engineered to be the jailers. And the infants, they are the locks. Caleb froze. The pieces of the puzzle slammed together in his mind. Insomnia. The impossibility of sedation. The warning whisper. Keep them awake. They weren't sick, Caleb whispered. They were guarding something. Carr nodded. A relic. An ancient intelligence from the precursor era. A weapon of the void. It sleeps within the core. As long as the lockkeepers the litter are awake, the weapon is dormant. Carr raised his voice to a shout. But you, Caleb Ward, in your arrogance you put them to sleep, you turned the key. The ground shook violently. The core turned a violent, angry crimson. When the locks sleep, the prisoner wakes. Carr laughed. And I shall be its master, Seren screamed. Caleb spun around. The baby was coming. He didn't have time for ancient prophecies. He had a patient. He dropped to his knees beside Seren. Push, Seren, ignore him. Look at me. Seren gripped his collar, her claws tearing the fabric. I cannot hold it back. You don't hold it back, Caleb yelled. You let it go with a final shattering cry. Seren arched her back. The cry was joined by another sound. A thin, high-pitched wail. The hybrid was born. It was a small thing, furless and pale, but its eyes were open, and they were galaxies. The baby cried, and the dream core shattered. A shockwave of pure psychic energy exploded from the infant. It hit the core, cracking the crystal. It hit Carr Dorn, knocking him off his feet. It hit the Purity Clade members on the balcony, forcing them to their knees. But it didn't hit Caleb. Because the baby wasn't broadcasting fear. It was broadcasting the lullaby. Caleb stared at the child. The baby was humming with the same resonance that Caleb had used for months. It had learned the song in the womb. Carr Dorn scrambled up, his face twisted in madness. No, Carr screamed. It is supposed to be a weapon, seized the child. He raised his staff, aiming a bolt of neural lightning at the newborn. Caleb moved. He didn't think about safety. He didn't think about survival. He thought about Avery. He thought about Penny. He thought about the tiny, fragile life in his arms. He stepped in front of Seren and the baby. But he didn't block the attack with his body. He blocked it with his mind. He grabbed the dream bond, the connection that Carr had mocked, and he pulled. He pulled on every thread of connection he had. He pulled on Penny's love. He pulled on the litter's trust. He pulled on the baby's raw power, and he slammed it all into Carr Dorn. You want a dream, Caleb roared. I will give you a nightmare. He didn't kill Carr. That would be too easy. That would be a soldier's way, and Caleb was a medic. Instead, he forced Carr into the loop. He projected the memory of every Minari child Carr had ordered killed. He projected the terror of the parents. He projected the cold, lonely silence of the void that Carr worshipped. Carr froze. His eyes rolled back. He dropped the staff. He fell to his knees, clawing at his own face, screaming soundlessly as he was trapped in a prison of his own making. The Purity Clade watched their leader break. They looked at the human who stood glowing with the light of the core, holding a hybrid child, shielded by a matriarch. They dropped their weapons. Captain Caldwell and her team stormed the room a second later. Weapons raised. Clear, Caldwell shouted. Secure the perimeter. She ran to Caleb. Ward's situation. Caleb slumped against the surgical table, exhausted beyond measure. He looked at Carr Dorn, who was curled in a fetal position, weeping. Patient is stabilized, Caleb whispered. He looked down at Seren. She was holding the baby. She looked tired, battered but alive. It is a boy, she said softly. Caleb touched the baby's head. The little boy looked up at him and blinked. He has your nose, Caleb said, his voice cracking. And unfortunately, he has your timing. The debriefing took 3 days. The cleanup took 3 weeks. The revelation of what the Dream Core actually held changed everything. It wasn't a weapon as Carr had believed. It was a library. Dr. Pike stood with Caleb and Seren in the nursery, looking at the data pad. "It is an archive," Pike explained, shaking her head in disbelief. "An ancient human navigation AI lost during the first expansion. The Minari ancestors found it couldn't understand it, and built a biological cage around it to keep it from dreaming too loud and disturbing them." "So, the kittens?" Caleb asked, rocking the new baby, whom they had named Joran, in his arms. "Biological dampeners," Pike said. "Living fuses. If they stayed awake, the signal was grounded. If they slept, the circuit closed and the AI woke up." "And Avery knew?" Saren asked. Pike nodded somberly. She found the patterns in the old data. She knew the Minari were suffering because they were cutting themselves off from the dream state to keep this thing contained. She wrote the lullaby not just to soothe, but as a command code. A patch. Caleb hummed the tune softly. "The stars are dim. The void is deep. It tells the AI to stand by," Pike said. "To dream peacefully. It turns the scream into a whisper." "So we don't need to keep the kittens awake anymore?" Penny asked. She was sitting on the floor, dragging a laser pointer for the now very energetic litter to chase. "No, sweetie," Caleb said. "They can sleep all they want." He looked at Joran. The baby was fast asleep, his chest rising and falling in a perfect, peaceful rhythm. "And Carr?" Dorn Saren asked. "Committed to the high-security psychiatric ward," Pike said. "He doesn't speak much. He just cries." Caleb walked over to the window. The station was peaceful. The Purity Clade had disbanded their lies, exposed by the truth of the archive. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was serene. Through the bond, he felt her love. It was steady, warm, and unbreakable. "You kept your promise," she said. "You saved them." Caleb leaned his head against hers. "I didn't save them," he said. "We did." He looked at the reflection in the glass. A human man, a Minari woman, a human girl, a hybrid baby, and 12 chaotic kittens, tearing apart a sofa in the background. It was the strangest family in the galaxy. But as Caleb closed his eyes and listened to the soft, rhythmic breathing of his household, he realized something. For the first time in 3 years, the silence didn't hurt. Daddy Penny called out, "Yeah, Pen, can we get a dog?" "The kittens need a horse." Caleb opened his eyes and looked at Seren. "Absolutely not," they said in unison, and then they laughed.